For our first segment, we are going to start a conversation about the 2014 elections. And the first thing we're going to do as we start this segment is look at voter turnout. We've talked about voter turnout many times on this show and the fact that people in our country don't vote. And in my opinion, the failure to vote is probably the #1 issue that leads to this dysfunction and polarization. As we said on one of our earlier shows, if you think of your vote as currency, you get what you pay for. And if you don't vote, you essentially don't buy anything, or you don't get what you wanted, you don't get what you paid for. And that's the biggest problem in the system right now. In 2014, we had a horrible year, just horrible. Abysmal is the word we're going to use in a minute. An abysmal year in terms of voter turnout. The primaries were the worst turnout in an incredibly long period of time, and the midterms were equally bad. So we're going to look at these numbers and later try and analyze how we're getting these numbers and maybe some ways to avoid this in the future, drive turnout, and then when we drive turnout, drive better results. So let's take a look at the board. So again, we're looking at the 2014 midterm turnout. In this case, we're focusing on the primaries. And for this particular segment, I'm working off an article that was in the July 23rd Washington Post. And it was an article basically entitled, "Voter Turnout in Primary Elections, blah, 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 has been abysmal." That's the abysmal word we were talking about. Now, I apologize if the data is a bit old. I wasn't able to find relevant data for the entire primary cycle. But this particular set of data, in going through July 23rd, encompasses 25 states, so it is half the country, slightly over half the eligible voting population. So from a statistical sense, it is very relevant. And in our segment with Carlin Bowman, I think she's going to tell you that the year was just totally a disaster. As you know, we filmed this show in segments, so I'm filming this segment after I did Carlin, so there's a bit of a contextual timing element there that we'll deal with. But this segment is about half the primaries, 25 states, and then her segment, she's going to talk about all the primaries. And either way, any way you look at it, just abysmal. So the first number I want to talk about is 14.6%, which is the turnout for the primaries through the first half of the year. 14.6%. There was 18 million voters who voted in these primaries, but there was 123 million eligible voters. So think about that. 123 million people could have come to vote, and only 18 million showed up, 14.6%. Abysmal by any stretch of the imagination. As bad as this is, we're down 18% from the year 2010. Now again, we're talking about midterm elections here, and midterm elections are always much lower than presidential elections. We've had segments that talk about votes and compared voting in presidential versus midterm. Midterm is always lower, I get that, but again, these numbers are drastically bad, and we're 20% lower than we were just 4 years ago. Think about that, a 20% reduction in the number of people that took the time to vote. Here's a range. The high was Montana with 26.3% in their primaries, and the low was Iowa, 9.7%. So again, think about this. The state that had the highest turnout, for their primaries was only 26%. That's the high watermark. And then we have a state that had less than 10%. So let's think about the impact of that. When you go to vote and there's an election, the winner is basically 50% plus 1 vote. That wins for you. So what we're saying, and let's take a look at the board again here, in terms of impact, in Montana, someone could have won an election by obtaining literally 13.16% of the eligible voters. In Iowa, where only 9.7% turned out, someone could have won an election by only obtaining the votes of 4.86 of the eligible voters. Let's reverse that. This means that in the state of Iowa, 95% of the people effectively did not have a say in who got elected. Only 5% of the people had a say in who got elected in the primary. Now granted, since it's the primary and not the general, you may only be talking about which Republican got selected, which Democrat got selected. But either way, if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, you should still be infuriated to think that 95% of you didn't bother to show up, or 95% of you didn't have a say in the outcome, whereas only 5% of you got to make that choice. 5% got to make that choice. Another statistic is that in only 4 of these 25 states was 20% exceeded. So the impact percentage for a 20% state is 10%. So here we have 21 states. In 21 states, the number of people in terms of turnout that all it took was to decide the primary was 10%. Very low, very low. And again, we're going back to this word abysmal. So this is your picture for 2014 for the primaries. This is starting to explain and tell you why our system is dysfunctional and polarized, because people are not spending their political currency. They're not spending it wisely. Well, they might be spending wisely from their perspective, but when up to 95% of the people don't wisely choose to spend their political currency, you're going to get bad results, and you're going to have a system that is dysfunctional and a system that's polarized. Okay? All right, now let me fix the whiteboard. We'll do another segment. Joseph, do you have